Okay, let's start with lesson 3. Lesson 3, middle one, called the heat energy. It's a form of energy. Heat energy, it's a form of energy. Like we talking about the potential energy and the kinetic energy in talking about the potential and the kinetic in lesson number 2, but lesson number 3, we will talk about the heat energy. Okay, so we can get the heat energy by what? How can I get the heat energy? We can get the heat energy if you change the mechanical energy into heat energy. Like what? If you rub your hand, when you rub your hand, so the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. When you rub your hand, faster, 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 so we feel heat. We feel heat. Why? Because the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. So we can get the heat energy by changing the mechanical energy. By changing what type of mechanical energy? That changing the kinetic energy into heat energy. And also we can get the heat energy by the sun, because the sun, it's the main source of the heat and the main source of the light on the earth. So here in these pictures, the bicycle, when you ride the bicycle and move it fast, so the kinetic energy in the bicycles, it changes into heat energy. If you touch the wire, of the bicycle, so you can feel hot or you can feel the heat. So we can get energy by the sun, because the sun is the main source of the light and main source of the heat on the earth. And also we can get the heat from changing the mechanical energy into heat energy, like if you rub your hands. So there is a life applications about this. Life application about the heat energy. Number one, you feel warm when you rub your hands together. So in this weather, all of you, we feel warm when we rub your hands like this. Why? Why? Because if I ask you here, why you feel warm when you rub your hands together in winter? Because the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy, or the mechanical energy, it changes into heat energy. Also, number two, burning a match when it rubs with a rough surface, like this. When the kinetic energy, or when a match rubs with a rough surface, so the heat energy produced. So the heat energy produced. So this is life application about changing the mechanical energy into heat energy. And also number three, the nail will get hot when we pull it out from a thick piece. If you use a hammer and want to remove this nail from the wooden, here the hammer and the wooden piece, there is here the friction force here between this hammer and the wooden piece, and also the kinetic energy happen here, it changes into heat energy. So if you touch the nail or if you touch the surface of the wooden, so you can feel warm. So that's why the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. This is about life applications, about it changing all of these questions. If I ask you, give reason, you feel warm when you rub your hands. Why burning a match when it rubs with a rough surface? Why the nail gets hot when you want to remove it from a wooden piece? Why? all of these answers because the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. So we feel warm, the match will burn it, and the nail gets hot. So the reason here, because in the three applications, because the conversion of the mechanical energy into heat energy. And conversions means the changing of the mechanical energy into heat energy by the friction or by the friction force. Clear? Now we will make an activity to show that the mechanical energy or the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. It's a simple experiment or simple activity to show, or what, Karim?
Miss, which page أفتح miss؟ أفتح أي page؟
I think page 40 on the lesson heat energy. I don't remember which page. I'm sorry. Munir, which page in the booklet?
I don't know.
You don't know? Can you help me? Karim, which page in the booklet? I think page 51. I think page 51 or 50.
It's page 49.
49. Okay. The heat energy in the page 49. The starting of the heat energy of this lesson in page 49. Yeah, Karim. Thank you, Munir. Okay, so this activity, it's a simple activity to show that the kinetic energy can it changes into heat energy. Okay, can it changes into heat energy. If I have some poles, some metallic poles, small metallic poles like this, and plastic jar and thermometer, okay, and then put these small metallic poles in the jar and then measure its temperature. Okay, measure its temperature. Then cover this jar and move it fast. Shake it rapidly for 30 minutes or whatever. Shake this jar fast. And then measure the temperature after shaking. Measure the temperature of the small spheres or small poles after shaking. We can measure that the temperature of the spheres, it increases gradually. After shaking, after the kinetic energy, the temperature of these spheres or these poles will increases. Why? Because the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. Because the speed of the spheres, when I increase the speed of the spheres, their friction will, there will be frictions between each other. If I shake the jar with the spheres fast, so the friction, there are the friction force about each spheres, the surface of the spheres between each other. So by increasing the speed, so I increase the friction, so the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. So the kinetic energy will changes into heat energy, like when you rub your hand. If you rub your hand here, but if you rub your hand rapidly for 30 minutes, so you feel warmer. Why? Because the kinetic energy changes into heat energy. Okay, because the kinetic energy changes into heat energy. So our conclusion, the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy because the sphere's movement, when we move the spheres or when we move the small poles rapidly, so the friction force will arises. The friction force arises. The friction between each other arises. So the temperature will be increased. The temperature will be increased. So that's why the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. And you have to know that the temperature is directly proportional to the speed. Like, middle one, if I move my hand, but like this, its speed decrease with a small speed. You feel warm? Yes, but if I increase the speed, so if I increase the speed, there are more friction force, so the temperature will increases more and more and more. So the temperature is directly proportional. If the speed increases, the temperature will be increases. What, Omar? What يا عمر؟
ميس لو سمحتي أنا عايزة أسأل حضرتك سؤالين.
Ask me.
هو أول حاجة، هو حضرتك واقفة على أول بيج اللي هي بتاعت اللايف أبليكيشنز عشان مش باين عنده غيرها.
كده مش ظاهر؟
أنا مش ظاهر.
أول بيج مش بتتحرك خالص؟
أنا لا، عند تاني بيج اللي هي بتاعت اللايف أبليكيشنز.
طيب wait تاني.
بيساوي كده شغال. تاني حاجة بقى ميس عشان
ثواني
أعمل
عمر ثانية كده Can you see the screen now, Omar?
Yes.
Okay. What else?
question حضرتك.
What else?
في اللايف أبليكيشن في الجيف ريزون وأنا ما سمعتش الأنسر.
Here, when you feel warm. Okay, when you feel warm, when you rub your hands. Why you feel warm when you rub your hands together? Why? Why burning a match? Why the match is burning when it rubs with a rough surface? Why the nail gets hot if you need to remove it from a wooden piece? All of these answers, that's because the conversion of the mechanical energy, or the changing of the mechanical energy into heat energy. Because when you rub your hands, there are some friction force happened inside your hands. arises. The friction force arises here when two something touch each other. So the kinetic energy, I move my hands. So the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. So the reasons of the three applications is the changing of mechanical energy into heat energy by the friction force or by friction only.
شكرا ميس.
Okay.
Okay, شكرا.
Thank you. What's your رؤى؟ رؤى?
Salsabila and Jor can't understand the life application.
The life applications?
They write in the chat.
Okay. Salsabil and Nijar, concentrate with me here. I said that we can get energy. How can you get the heat energy? You can get the heat energy by changing mechanical energy or type of mechanical, which is kinetic energy, into heat energy. Like if you rub your hands, when you rub your hands, you feel warm or no? Where is Salsabil? Because I want to ask her. Nijar, okay. Nijar, if you rub your hands together, you feel warm or no?
Yes, if you want.
Yes, I feel warm. Why? Because the kinetic energy, I move my hands. So the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy. The type of our lesson today, which is called the heat energy. How can I get the heat energy? How can I obtain the heat energy? By what? By number one, the sun, because the sun is the main source of the heat on the earth. The sun gives us the heat. And also by changing kinetic energy into heat energy by friction. When two something touch each other and starting to move, so there are friction force about, yes, there are friction force about these two something. So the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy.
Okay.
So the life applications, number one, we feel warm. And also we can burning a match. Why? Because the friction arises between the match and a rough surface. The match. And also, if you need to remove this nail from this wood, so the nail becomes hot. Why the nail becomes hot? Because the friction arises here. عشان هنا في friction. طب والفريكشن عملت ايه؟ عملت changing kinetic energy into heat energy. Clear, Nijar?
Okay. Yes.
Salsabil. Where is Salsabil? Salsabil. Salsabil. Unmute yourself. Salsabil, I can't hear you. Clear this point? So the life applications here, all of these three life applications, why? Because the reason here, that's why the changing of the mechanical energy into heat energy. Changing the mechanical energy into heat energy. And then we said that if you need to prove the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy, get small poles, metallic poles, and then put it in a plastic jar and measure their temperature. So also record their temperature, and shake the jar rapidly, then record the temperature after shaking, so we can measure that, or we can observe that the temperature of the spheres increases gradually. The temperature of the spheres increases gradually. Why the temperature of the spheres increases? Because we increase the speed of the spheres. And so there are some friction happened inside or arises between each other, in each surface of the small poles. So the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy, or therefore the temperature rises. So our conclusion that the kinetic energy, it changes into heat energy because the friction between each other. Okay, and you have to know if the speed increases, keep in your mind, if you increase the speed when you rub your hands, so the temperature will increases. So when the speed increases, the temperature will increases. Why? Because the temperature is directly proportional with the speed, and therefore their kinetic energy, and also with their kinetic energy. Clear this point, middle one? Lujain, this point is clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, thank you, Lujain. Now we will talk about how the heat energy is transferred. How the heat energy is transferred. We take this point in Junior 6. The heat energy transferred from the higher temperature object to the lower temperature object. The heat energy is transferred from the higher temperature object to the lower temperature object. Then it stops. It stops what? When they are equal in their temperature. When they are equal in their temperature. Like if you hold a cup of tea, hot cup of tea, okay? So the higher temperature object here is the hot cup of tea, but your hand is lower temperature. So the heat energy transferred from the cup of tea to your hand. It will transfers. Then it stops when the two objects become equal in their temperature. When the temperature of your hand equal to the temperature of the cup of tea, so there is no heat transfers. The heat will stops transferring or transporting from the object to another. So the heat energy transferred from what? Transferred from the higher temperature object. In these pictures here, the higher temperature object. It will transfer the heat energy transferred to the lower temperature object. And then it will stops. It will stops when they are equal, when they are the same in the temperature. So what does it mean by the heat energy? We also take this definition in Junior 6, but here the heat energy is, it's a form of energy. It's a form, that definition of the heat energy. What does it mean by heat energy? It's a form of energy which transfers from a warmer body to a colder one. So here, warmer object, its temperature increases. So, and this is colder object. So the heat transfers from warmer to cooler or to colder. Transfers. So the heat transfer from the higher temperature object to the lower temperature object. And then it stops. It stops what? When the two objects have the same temperature. When the same temperature or are equal in their temperature. So again, what does it mean by the heat energy? Heat energy, it's a form of energy. It's a form of energy. Transfers from what? Transfers from warmer body to or hotter body to a colder one. What, عمر؟
لا معلش بس انا نسيت اعرف بس الايزي من question الفيك سوري.
Okay, middle one, the Zoom will turn off after 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I resend again a link, then join it. Okay. So the heat energy, again, the heat energy, what does it mean by the heat energy? It's a form of energy, transfers from higher temperature object or hotter body to a colder one. Transfers from hot to cold. And then it will stop. It stopped what? When the temperature or when the two objects are the same temperature or are equal in their temperature. So what does it mean by the temperature? If I measure the temperature, what does it mean by the temperature? Temperature, it's a condition. Condition states what? States the direction of the energy. It states the direction of the energy, whether from or the object when it in contact together. So the temperature, it's a condition. It's a degree of hotness or coldness. We take this definition in Junior 6 also. So, but here in middle one, the temperature, it's a condition. This is conditions, states the direction of the heat energy. States the direction of the heat energy, whether from or to the object. From or to the object when it comes in contact with another object. Okay, so we will talk about the ways of the heat transfers. How can the heat transfers? How can the heat transfers from one object to another? We have three ways to transfer the heat. We have three ways to transfer the heat, or the heat energy can be transferred from one object to another by three ways. Number one, conduction. What does it mean by conduction? Conduction means if two objects touch each other. Number two, convection. And number three, radiation. So again, the heat energy or the ways that the heat energy can be transferred, number one, conduction, convection, and radiations. Conduction, convection, and radiations. Where is Ahmed? What, Ahmed?
بس انا عندي السكرين معلقة على نمبر 4.
تاني برضو؟
ايوه خلاص جت
كده جت؟
تمام.
What's your name? What's your name?
انا كريم يا ميس.
Karim? Okay, right, Karim Haitham. I don't you. Okay. What's your question? What is your question, Karim? You need me? Okay, again, so the ways of the heat transfer. The heat can be transferred by three ways. The heat can be transferred by 3 ways. Number 1, conduction, and number 2, convection, and number 3, radiations. So how many ways? 3 ways: conduction, convections, and radiations. Number 1, the transfer of the heat by conductions. Through what? You have to keep in your mind these 3 points. Between the solid objects, the heat transfers by conductions. Between the solid objects, like here, between the solid objects, if I hold this pen, so the heat transferred from the pen to my hands between the solid objects. Number 2, the transfer of the heat by convection. Through what? Through gases and liquids. Through gases and liquids. Inside the water, inside the liquid, inside this pen, the heat transfers by convection. Number 3, the transfer of the heat by radiation. Radiation through material media or non-material ones. Through the air or through the vacuum. The radiations, the heat can be transferred to our hand by radiation through the air or through, if you stand on the heater, stand in front of the heater or in front of the cooler. So the heat transfers from the heater to our body through the vacuum. So through material media or non-material ones. So again, middle 1, this point, it's very, very, very important. You have to know that between the solid objects, the heat transfers by conduction only. Between the solid objects. And between gases and liquids, the heat transferred by convection. And between or through material media and non-material ones, the heat can transferred by the radiations or through the vacuum. Where is Munir? What do you need, Munir? Wait. What, Munir?
Miss, I can't understand the radiation.
Radiations, okay. We will take this point. We'll take this point later here. The heat transfers by, we will discuss each one of them. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
So the heat can transfer by the conduction between what? Between the solid objects only. Between the solid objects only. Like if you have a cup of tea or hot cup of tea, okay, and metallic spoon. Put the metallic spoon inside the hot cup of tea for minutes and then touch the upper of the spoon. You feel what? You feel the heat of the spoons. What do you feel? I can feel this metallic spoons will become hot, Why? Because the heat transferred from the hot tea and then transferred till reach to the end of the metallic spoon. So the heat transfers by conduction, through the solid objects. From the higher temperature to another one. From the higher temperature to another one lower temperature. So if you touch this metallic spoon, we feel warm. Why you can feel warm? Why? Because the heat energy transferred from the bottom one to the topper, or the transfers of the heat energy through the spoon, through the solid objects. So like this. If this is the spoon, so the heat energy transfers from the end or transfers from one end to another. So the